afternoon to all. First of all, let me thank the organizer of this conference to have me here to talk about a topic that, although being controversial these last years, is very essential for the well-being of African people. Before discussing scenarios for exiting the CFA franc, it's important to me to present the mechanism put in place in the framework of monetary cooperation within the zone franc, and in order to better understand the issue at stake. After that, I will give some insight on the intellectual rationale behind the ongoing populist demand to disband the CFA franc currency board and the constraint facing those African countries seeking to exit the franc zone. I will then talk about some viable options for African countries seeking to exit the CFA franc zone, and we end with some recommendation. First, the CFA franc was born in December 26, 1945, the day France ratified the Bretton Woods Agreement and made its first declaration of parity to the International Monetary Fund. Today, the franc zone is presented as an example of cooperation based essentially on four fundamental rules. First, free convertibility between the currency of the zone at a fixed parity. Second, unlimited convertibility of the various currencies in the zone. Free movement of capital within the zone and standardization of the regulation of financial relations with the others. The pooling of external assets. The central bank of the franc zone must deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserve with the French Treasury in an account known as the operation account. As advantage of this device, the defender of the franc zone find that the CFA franc has a strong guarantee of convertibility. The member countries of the franc zone would be assured of a stability of their currency. These arguments do not convince many analysts and activists on the African countries. African people, and especially the youth, reject the CFA francs mainly because the CFA francs is the materialization of the monetary dependency of the member countries of the franc zone and the manifestation of neocolonialism on the part of France. The obligation to deposit 50% of the reserve in the French Treasury is, among other things, an indicator of this form of colonialism. It is believed that this deposit deprives the African countries of the franc zone of liquidity and causes them to lose part of their sovereignty capacity. Another problem is that the governors of the two central banks do not have the freedom to vary the exchange rate of their currency as the parity with the euro. The euro forces them to follow the policy of the European Central Bank. Finally, it's argued that the peg to the euro means that the CFA franc is subject to fluctuation of the European currency, with consequences that are sometimes harmful to the export of countries in the zone, at least when the euro is strong. The CFA franc is too strong currency for the economy of the franc zone, and its operation is too rigid and not conducive to financing development. Indeed, the fixed exchange rate means that the value of the franc CFA is determined by the economic situation within the Eurozone and not by the economic situation within the franc zone. Moreover, excessive monetary rigor to preserve the parity of the franc lead countries to neglect certain indicators such as unemployment than if they were in a floating regime. The franc zone countries have very high production costs for most of the goods they consume, and the strength of their currency relative to their economy makes imports such cheaper than local production. As a result, they are forced to rely on imports to the detriment of strengthening their local production capacity. As a result, the CFA franc zone has consumption economies and not production economies. These countries therefore need a currency that lead them to produce what they consume. This will balance their trade balance to some extent. Moreover, the CFA franc does not allow for good financing for the zone's economies. While in the Eurozone, the ratio of credit to GDP is 100%, it is only 23% in the franc zone. Countries do not have such margin to finance the socio-economic infrastructure that is essential to the development of their economies. Central banks therefore do not provide sufficient support for the financing of economic activity. Also, free transferability leads to the flight of capital that is indispensable for reinvesting in this economy. This situation allows multinationals to easily repatriate their profit to to European countries to reinvest elsewhere to the detriment of investment in Africa. This discourages national saving and favor external borrowing. As a result, countries are in vicious circle of chronic indebtedness. All in all, the CFA franc is a currency that protects countries against exogenous shocks, but it is too strong for the economy of the zone. This does not encourage production or export other than raw material and consequently the well-being of the population. But despite this argument and the strong pressure from the population and the youth in particular, African countries are still reluctant to leave the franc zone. In fact, maintaining the CFA appear to be more related to habit, fears of the unknown. Public decision makers prefer to stay in the comfort zone. In fact, there is a low level of political will to tackle the problem in these countries. Let's talk now about some viable options for the African countries seeking to exit the CFA franc zone. As regards to viable options for African countries to exit the CFA franc zone, 4 possibilities are generally proposed: revision of the agreement, sovereign currency, African or regional common currency, binary currency. The revision of the monetary agreement aims to modify certain aspects of the operation of the franc zone, namely the reduction of reserve requirement to deposit with the franc treasury, and the relax of the peg to the euro in order to adopt a floating exchange. In fact, these changes aims at finding answers to the controversial point or the political irritant that have been the subject of much criticism from African people opinion. The fact is that technically the proposed change will not provide any major advantage to the CFA franc. As for the first point, the reduction of the reserve requirement, one should keep in mind that the reserve are those that guarantee and determine the quantity of bill and coin that circulate in the CFA zone. Reducing reserve automatically means reducing the monetary base. This in turn will lead to the reduction of money supply and thus the liquidity of the economy. From a technical point of view, there is no advantage to reducing the stock of reserve held by the French Treasury. The second point, relaxing the peg to the euro in order to adopt a floating exchange would remove all interest from the CFA francs. Indeed, what would be the point of the currency stored by France if the value of the currency they are supposed to guarantee can be fluctuated independently of this stock? The solution of a sovereign currency consists of the countries of the franc zone in adopting their own currency. There is no particular legal obstacle to a country denouncing the monetary agreement and taking the initiative to create its own money currency. Having sovereign currency requires that the currency has two qualities: stability and flexibility. Stability is necessary for this instrumental mission of money, which are a standard of measurement. A standard does not change overnight. An instrument of exchange which must be reliable, and an instrument of saving, the value of saving should not be subject to deterioration. Flexibility in relation to foreign currency meaning the possibility of changing the exchange rate of currency is necessary whenever the country imports more than it sells. Most of the countries of the CFA zone are in this posture. The third option is the common sovereign currency. Is the establishment of the sovereign currency on a regional scale or an African scale. The common currency that has the advantage of being applied on a larger scale than that of a single country. This could provide significant margin of internal adjustment to balance the external deficit and maintain the value of the currency. The third one is a binary currency. It is a solution that allows a major fully convertible currency such as the CFA to coexist with the same production system with a minor currency whose purchasing power is reduced to local production. Let's give some recommendation now. The first one is I would like to say that it's important to adopt a common regional currency. This means maintaining the advantage of the single currency, the actual CFA franc, which would be based on a solid foundation and work outside the exclusive guarantee of the euro in order to guarantee a real autonomy of the currency. The principle of pooling foreign exchange reserve must be maintained while avoiding depositing these reserves in the French Treasury. They should be deposited in the central bank of the zone. To do this, it will be necessary first of all to change the name of the currency and to remove France from the management bodies of the currency. The zone must have its own African currency that bears in the identity of the zone that use it. It will then be necessary to have a currency whose value corresponds to the economy of the zone. To do so, it is imperative to change the exchange rate regime and set up a floating regime pegged to a basket of currency with which the country have an important trade. It will also be necessary to redefine a new monetary policy. In particular, the rate applied to foreign exchange reserve could be gradually reduced, taking into account the need of the zone economy, and this must be done by the African countries themselves. Finally, the convertibility of the new currency between YMU and CMAC, the two zones, must be ensured. This will promote inter-regional trade and soft cooperation. In addition, free transferability within the zone must be regulated. In this context, capital flight by multinational outside the zone must be limited, and Africa could have more resources at its disposal to finance development. Thank you all for listening to me.